Welcome in. I'm Ethan from the Gnawing Rootbiters, and this is my guide to playing Starlight. By the end of this guide, I'd hope that you are able to understand Starlight enough to play them at a mid-level difficulty and consistently win at that. I also hope that you explore the different playstyles that Starlight has to offer. I personally like a playstyle of drafting a lot of cards, and I will be showing you how to do that in my turn-based playstyle, but I'll also give you the tools to understand the different cards and experiment on your own, which I highly encourage. Even though I have a preferred playstyle, I think that there are many ways to play the Spirit more than others, and you should try them all out, as honestly, it's the most fun way to play this game, just discovering what we can do. So without further ado, let's get into who Starlight is. Every once and again, where Starlight falls to the ground, there arises a new spirit. Its essence is initially that of the stars and nighttime sky, but from the moment it touches the island, it begins to change, adapting and reimagining itself for its new home. Only a few of the island spirits came to be in this fashion, but many of them have been memorable. This one arrives shortly after the invaders started to spread, striking the earth where they had cleared land for farming. Fragile and new, it was saved from dissolution by Stone's unyielding defiance, and in gratitude, fights the invaders even as it seeks to define itself. Much like Starlight's lore, Starlight's gameplay kind of mirrors that same idea of being an empty vessel, kind of learning how to become its own unique spirit. And thanks to all the cards that it has at its disposal, as well as one of the most unique growth tracks of any other spirit, you'll be able to craft your own playstyle, even game to game, and you'll always find new ways to play the spirit, new things that you're going to be based around, and I hope that that brings a lot of fun to your games. Now, let's get into this growth track. So, there are a couple different things going on here. First off, the growth tracks go from left to right, just like any other spirit. So taking one off here and one off here is going to be allowed. However, you are not allowed to take off things on the right side, just like any other spirit. The difference comes when you finally unlock this track. This is a new growth option, and you have to put a marker on the one that you will not be using for the rest of the game. This is why Starlight has so many iterations, because you are only able to choose one or the other for the rest of the game. So, to go over them really quickly, we have the round half option Reclaim, the Reclaim normal, we have the 3 energy, and we have the 2 damage, at least all in this row. And then on the right side, we have gain power, card plays, gain power and energy, and then card plays move at fast. Generally, all of these are going to be viable, except with a couple exceptions. If you are picking half Reclaim, you need to pick the opposite on the third track. So the first and third should be opposites at all times. This way you can both get the option to either full Reclaim or to gain a power. And you don't want to overlap on this because there's no other way to reclaim cards besides one card that is something you do not want to have to use every turn as a card player. And generally, although the third card play is very good, if you want to play for major powers, the +3 energy is almost required. And I say almost because there are ways to cheat out energy through cards and through your growth options. But generally, major powers require this option. And because you're able to pick 3, the +3 energy is actually pretty efficient. Lastly, on this bottom track, both options are going to be viable. I prefer the extra card play and playing a power at fast because you can put a major at fast, but mostly I just like throwing cards on the table. I like proccing my innate powers. +2 damage at 0 range during growth is basically during fast, is also very good, and you have a lot of mobility with your options. So, bottom track is very flexible. Others are going to be more playstyle dependent, and you should set those up towards the beginning of the game. Very bottom, we have these permanent, and I do mean permanent element markers. Once you unlock them, you have to put an element there for the rest of the game. Lastly, there is the +1 energy every time you remove one of these presences. So just remember, it is a one-time thing the moment you remove it, and that should be it for the growth tracks. Let's talk about the cards. Starlight starting cards are built, obviously, to create your own spirit, and this is how. First, Boon of Reimagining. You are going to forget a card in hand or in your discard in order to look at 6 cards and pick 2. This is the card you usually want to play first during your slow power turns when you're figuring out your spirit. You get to see more options this way and have a better idea of what you want to build around. Shape the Self Anew gives you a minor power, and in the future, you can forget this card to gain 3 energy. This is going to be nice if you are really energy screwed, if you need enough energy to play a major power. And although you have the secondary effect, it is very difficult to proc unless you somehow get the 4 card plays or an extra moon early into the game. Gather the Scattered Light of Stars, for the most part, is just a reclaim 2 from the play into your hand. And if you forget it, you can reclaim more. This forget part is going to be very hard to use. I don't recommend playing around it, but there are ways to make it work. And if you want to test it out, go ahead. Lastly, Piece of the Nighttime Sky. You skip an early Ravage from a Sacred Site, and you can forget this card to do it again. I think it is one of the best early game Ravage skips. However, I do not recommend using it for my build order, and I plan on testing play in the future with it as a focus. But because I am happy to sacrifice Blight to play for yourself, we will be forgetting it on turn 1, and I'll show you what turn 1 looks like right now. Really quick before we get into turn 1, I wanted to talk about this concept in a lot of turn-based games called tempo and greed. These two concepts kind of play hand in hand, especially on Spirit Island, because Spirit Island is kind of time-gated. Your turn after turn isn't free. You're going to have to deal with invaders as the turns go on. So being able to play for yourself and play for the board state are going to be 2 very important concepts to work around, especially with someone like Starlight. So I'll give you an example of tempo. Tempo is time. It's playing for the board. You play for the immediacy of what's happening. Just like this guy, he came in to distract us at the perfect time. Usually, play for tempo, you want to play your impactful cards right away, even at the cost of your own spirit. Maybe you go really low on energy, maybe you have to pick certain growth options that aren't optimal. But either way, they are things that affect the board now in order to either buy us time in the future or win the game faster. The opposite of that is greed. Greed is when we play cards that will make the spirit stronger, but it won't necessarily affect the board state. So greeding multiple turns in a row might look like, oh, I want to play these 3 cards turn 1 so that we can get our powers, and then turn 2, I'm going to play these 2 cards after I put them back in our hand from turn 1. You will notice that the first 2 turns, you're basically doing nothing. You're doing very, very little on the board. These are both powers that just give you minor powers, and they don't necessarily help the board state. So just remember, playing for tempo is playing for the board, playing for greed is playing for yourself, and both will sacrifice the opposite thing. So tempo sacrifices the hand / the power of the spirit. Greed sacrifices the board state for the power of the spirit. A really quick note I wanted to mention, Starlight actually has the easiest setup in the game. You always go on a blighted land, which is going to be central to the board, and you have a lot of mobility. So usually let your teammates pick where to go, and then you should be able to go afterwards. Take whatever's left, and if you're really in a pinch and your teammate also says the same thing, honestly, just take the most central board that's touching the most lands. Usually it's going to be 5 lands, maybe more. You should be able to play around them. All right, with all that said, let's go to turn 1. This is what our turn 1 looks like. Little spoilers, as I already put the presence on the board. We will be picking add a presence, gain energy, and the +1 card plays. I just put the presence here for example. I won't actually be playing out the turns just because it's a guide. And what this does is this allows us to scale up really quickly, and on our turn 2 or turn 3, we will get these back in our hand to be played again. This way we get to look at 6 cards within 3 turns, and then after that, we should be set up enough to start impacting the board quickly, and if we have time, we will be able to play these on Reclaim for a 3rd time in the future. So let me simulate a turn of what this looks like. We wait till slow powers, and then we activate the Sidereal Guidance to hopefully prevent some builds. After that, there is a specific order. Gather the Light of Stars doesn't really matter, but Boon of Reimagining always goes first. This is because we get to pick 2 out of 6, which is a lot easier to build around when we play Shape the Self Anew. So just for the sake of example, I'm going to take Lure of the Unknown and Enticing Splendor. I see that they have a couple like elements. For example, in this, it is plant and air. Now when we play Shape the Self Anew, we're going to look for plant and air. We see air, we see air, we see plant. I'm going to take Dark and Tangled Wood. Obviously, when you're playing, it's going to be a little more strategic, but I'm just doing these for the sake of example. Generally, you want to play for your elements, though, with slight biases towards cheaper cards, cards with more elements, and cards that help you in the current board state. Now, there was one sad thing we had to do. For Boon of Reimagining, the first card, we had to forget Piece of the Nighttime Sky. It is a very good card, don't get me wrong. It's the best early Ravage skip, arguably. However, by forgetting it and tanking a couple Blight in the future, we will be able to scale up really quickly. Think of it like a sacrifice you just have to make. All right, that's our turn 1. Let's look at what turn 2 can look like. So if you notice, this is our hand for turn 2. We have gotten Boon of Reimagining and Shape the Self Anew back. And now this is where we ask, do we want to play for tempo or do we want to play for greed? So if we were to play for greed, this is an easier example. We would take off this presence, get this extra card, that's these 2 at least, and we should play this extra card play. Let's look for a minor power that's relatively cheap and can work with our cards. I like Delusions of Danger because of the extra moon it gives, and we are playing around air. The reason I want a moon is because I'm playing Boon of Reimagining and Shape the Self Anew. And now we are able to look at 6 more cards on slow. We're looking at 10 more cards on slow with 3 cards being picked out of the lot. Then come turn 3, turn 4, we'll be actually playing impactful cards that help the game. Now, you're going to have to choose whether you do this now or if you do them on turn 3. Because if you aren't able to manage turn 2 and things get out of hand, turn 3 will be too little too late for you to affect the board. So it's going to depend on your ally spirit, and it's going to depend on your adversary and the board state. What does a tempo turn look like? Let's reset this really quick. So we would be playing the 3 cards we just got. And if you'll notice with the element tracker, we are 1 off on the air. I want to get that 3rd element. Now, what's the easiest way to do that? Boom. This is going to be the case more often than not. However, if you instead wanted more energy, you can go here and get this reclaim option quickly, which will also get you an element next turn. However, this extra element is solid. You're going to keep it permanently. So remember, you only need to play 2 air cards every turn to activate the 3 air on innates. And the nice thing about this combo here is we have also activated the 2 moon on Sidereal Guidance. So generally, it's safe to say 3 elements is the breakpoint, 2 element moon is okay, 4 element sun is something you have to intentionally play for. Now, this will slow down your game. And then your 3rd pick can be either reclaim or gain energy. And what I mean slow down your game is you will have to play these 2 cards next turn. You don't have anything in your hand, you're too far away from reclaiming anything. And honestly, it's better to look at cards because now that we have the plant and the air synergy, you'll be able to get more cards thanks to the plant. You'll be able to push things around. Now you need to do more damage. Now you need to remove blight. You can play around these other card options or just all in on the ones you already have so that every turn you're getting that consistent innate power. So this is how turn 2 works. When time passes, just know that your turn 3 is going to look something like this. We're going to pick a card just for example. And you generally want to get the 3 card play. And this is where you're playing for your spirit again. So the last question on these couple turns is, hey, how do I know which tracks to go for? And that's a reasonable question. Well, if you notice we have nothing in hand, and we don't have a lot of ways to gain extra cards, we have to start working towards this reclaim, even if we don't meet certain element that we want to, like you only hit the 2 moon. It would be nice to unlock this 3rd moon, but then your next turn you're screwed because you have no cards in hand. You could also do this top portion, so you can look for more cards, but you're not going to gain cards as fast as you will be playing them. So working towards this reclaim is going to be a safe option, and you also get this element, which is nice once you see what's in your hand on the 2nd boon and sell for the new turn. Otherwise, you are safe to prioritize this top track to greed the gain power option. And if you really need, you should also look for this 2 energy. But remember, this reclaim is a high priority, and this card play is a first priority. Everything else on top of that is kind of managing your turns up until this reclaim. Now, what do you do once you have this reclaim option taken? Well, once the reclaim option is taken, we mostly want to play on tempo. We want to play the cards we got at our disposal from our multiple uses of these cards, and we want to try and work towards either the 2 damage / extra card play, or we want to gain extra elements to more consistently hit innates. And every now and then, if we find that the cards we have aren't very good and we have time to worry about stuff, you can play these 2 cards again from reclaim, but do not prioritize them. Prioritizing them is an early game thing you want to do twice in the first 3 turns ideally. And then from there, you can play the game as your created spirit. So, before we wrap up this guide, there are a couple other concepts I want to talk about. First off is, when do you draft major powers? Well, majors usually come once you have enough energy economy. So once you can accrue energy with this 2 cost, if your cards are relatively cheap, kind of like this hand so far, you notice that you're accruing the energy, you are able to take power cards with this top option. And usually you'll start forgetting either Shape the Self Anew or Boon of Reimagining once you're committed to your build. And the benefit is, the earlier you take it, the earlier you can play for the elements on that major power. You can also take it early, which I personally don't like to do. I know G likes to do it because he's addicted to major powers, but it definitely has utility. It is not a bad play whatsoever. And how about drafting cards? We talked about matching elements. That's the most basic version of it. However, there's one more thing you're able to do. Let's look at a card selection here. If you or your teammate drafts cards, which is important, you can start noticing that there are a lot of cards that are going to be out of the pool. There's going to be 3 waters, 3 airs, 3 earths, and 3 plants out of the pool. That just means I'm going to have a slight bias towards fire, sun, and moon. So let's just say we pick this one, and now it is our turn. We're going to say, oh, look, sun is pretty good. I can look for sun. I can look for animal. So if I didn't actually look at the cards themselves and just played around elements, I would take Call to Isolation due to the bias that we have looked at statistically. It is a very slight optimization, so this is what I use when I am not sure what to take. But I think that this is going to be for higher level only, or if you really like those small statistical niches. And I personally find it interesting. I'm a statistics player for the most part, although I like to mix in fun with these playstyles. Anyway, there are a couple cards you should be taking. Elemental Boon is a common one. Let me look at the deck really quick just to name a couple. Anything that is low cost tends to be nice because your spirit can suffer from expensive cards. Call to Trade, something like this, has 4 elements on it, which is also nice. And then things like Ellie Boon, another 4 element card, just tend to be on the stronger side. There are also these minor powers with extra effects. These extra effects tend to not be that strong, but they're pretty easy to proc on your spirit because you're playing for elements so much. So when you see them, just keep them in mind and kind of take your pick based on the strategy. All right, lastly, I want to talk about the innate powers. There is a slight tier list for them. I will say that Fire, Earth, and Sun are going to be your most consistent win cons. Fire is your main damage source that also generates fear. Sun helps you stall out how long you have to play for this Reclaim. So let's build you tempo, and it generates Fear for Fear cards. Also, the Reclaim, the Energy and Reclaim both help you avoid this +1 energy option. The plant is nice, but it is not necessary usually because you have other ways to gain powers. And the defend is almost always applicable because everyone ravages. And defend 5 at 1 range when you have a ton of mobility is actually very easy to hit consistently. Everything else, I would say, is nice, but you should just play around whatever you get, as that is usually the best way to play this Spirit. All right, that was the Starlight Guide. Thank you for watching. I was Ethan from the Gnawing Root Biters. Feel free to tell me what your favorite playstyle was. Thanks for listening, and I hope you have a good time on the island.